Well, I was just saying that Nathan's missing the first time I actually talked about video game music.
That's true. That's terrible. That's terrible. Maybe you can give post comments later.
Yeah. Well, if you are watching after the fact, welcome to this segment here. We've already heard from Irving interviewed a aspiring filmmaker whose name I cannot recall, and Nathan responded to some hot takes from the internet about video games, game design, and like I was saying earlier, I'm actually talking about video game music, but Nathan is not here. So today I want to talk a little bit about Austin Wintory and his music, specifically to the game Abzu, but just kind of in general, some stuff about him. So I haven't talked about video game music at all. I'm talking about media music. I've kind of focused on film because that's the world I have participated in and know infinitely more about than the video game world. But I think, it's important to talk a little bit about video game music. I'll try and keep this short, so I know we've gone on for a while. But some reasons why I think video game music is, in general, is worth talking about and thinking about. Number one, because the video game industry, despite my ignorance of it personally, I'm pretty sure video game the market is eclipsed film by a significant amount, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's massive.
Yeah, and it will only continue to grow, and the need of music in all those games is going to grow as well. So not only is it an opportunity, for people as composers and musicians, to get into that, but also just a great opportunity for the art form to continue to grow. And it is a different kind of art form than film composition, even though I don't have any firsthand experience with it. I honestly, my feeling is that as a performer, I think that I'll probably, if I can do, session playing one day, it'll probably be more doing things in the video game world than in the film world for that reason as well. But like I said, it's also worth talking about because it's a different art form, and it might not be obvious how it's a little bit different, but one way it's really different. You can see this in some Austin Wintory stuff. Is that a lot of times the structure of how these larger companies at least operate and involve composers is different than how it happens with film. The composers tend to be brought in earlier, and out of necessity too, for technological reasons as well. Making sure you not only can you write the music, but it can loop in the places where it needs to loop, right? Which people aren't familiar, looping just means a section repeats because, gameplay time is variable. You can play for different amounts of times. You can stay in the same area for different amounts of time, unlike a film, which is, point A to point B. So a composer needs to be brought in earlier so they can work, through all those things with the game designers. And because they get to be brought in earlier, and Austin Wintory is a really great example of this, the art gets a little bit more of a chance to develop and breathe. It's not something that's rushed, as a lot of film composition tends to be. So again, looking more specifically at Austin Wintory. So he's kind of my favorite video game composer. I don't know as many video game composers just because, we tend to not think about video game composers even in the media world quite as much. We're all focused on film and TV, and there's just not as much recognition publicly either. Not that there's a great recognition of film composers, but even less for people who are doing video game things. So I don't know nearly as many. I don't, people who are really active in the video game industry. So I don't, have a great depth in that area. But Austin Wintory has really stood out to me for some of his games. He's done some of the Assassin's Creed games, and then some of his I'm going to forget a whole bunch of things that he's done. But kind of a lot of some smaller things, things like I recently did a game called The Pathless, which is quite interesting musically. this game I'm going to talk about a little bit about called Abzu, which I think is this kind of sequel in a way to a game by the same studio called Journey, which is, again, very highly regarded. I understand. I haven't played any of these
The game
things.
Journey, or is the studio's name Jim? Oh, yeah, Journey was a big phenomenon because it pushed... that was a while ago. I can't even remember when that came out. But the significance of it was big because it was a very palpable shift for the mainstream towards a more artistic approach to video games in general, which I thought was glorious. So yeah.
Right. And he's really, Austin Wintory is really associated with these more artistic games that, like, from what I understand, generally revel more in like artistic beauty and like thematic things than action, like, intensity. So maybe that's partially why his music is so appealing to me. Obviously, things like Assassin's Creed would be a little bit different than that, but his music for that is also fascinating.
I've probably heard some pieces from him like years. I don't even remember, but like, I've never played an Assassin's Creed game, but I actually have intentionally listened to the score because someone told me to. I think someone recommended that I did because they liked it, and I remember liking it, but I don't remember it at all. So,
okay, yeah. So the other really cool thing about him is that he's very active, not so much on social media, but on like his YouTube channel. And some of this, I think, is because, again, the nature of how video game studios operate. They're not just, they don't, at least with him, they're not so concerned with intellectual property and like keeping things hidden and locked up. So, if you go, he has his own podcast, which is fascinating to listen to. Very active in that sort of thing, just talking, his thoughts on music and art in general. It's a lot you can learn from that if you're someone interested in the industry, not just video games, but in general. He also puts out a lot of his scores, like the notes themselves, on his YouTube channel with his comments. And he has like extensive comments on some of these games, like Abzu, which is really, really fascinating to read. There are people who have resources out there where you can like, oh, here's how I mixed this track or something like that, and that's interesting. But with him, he doesn't talk about that sort of stuff, but his commentary on his own process and like how he works with the game designers and whatever is really fascinating, because you really get into his mindset, like what sorts of things he's thinking about when he's composing. It's very different than like on a technical level, how do I mix and master something, which is normally the kind of stuff you can find online. So really, really interesting person if you are at all interested in media composition to check out. And I'm going to kind of draw from some of his comments on the game Abzu to think about what I think, what's so great about it. So again, I haven't played the game, but my understanding of it is that it's kind of you're playing as this female diver who is going through this underwater world and interacting with different animals, and you have to kind of restore like balance between underwater life and the advancements of civilization. And it's like roughly based on some ancient Sumerian text. One way that I think he had 3 years over which he worked on this, according to his comments. And one way you can see that, like, the result of having 3 years to work on this instead of like 3 months to write the whole thing, like this tends to be typical with film, is that he's very intentional about every element of this fantastic score. For instance, he takes a lot of lines from this ancient Sumerian religious text, and he has the choir sing it throughout, but like draws out each syllable so much that it just sounds like a wash of like pitch, like not like any individual syllables, not that we would understand Sumerian text anyway, but that's kind of hovering around in the background. His scores also tend to be very kind of a combination of ambient with a lot of melodic stuff in an orchestral setting, kind of a sparse or orchestral texture melody, but also a lot of ambient stuff, which is kind of a little bit of an unusual mix. And I think Abzu is maybe the score that he does best with that. Journey is also very good, and Pathless as well. Pathless in particular, he does something where he puts out like one of his tracks from the previous game and asks people to play their own take on it, and like whoever they want to. And if he takes like the three most interesting people and asks them to collaborate on the next track. So like the Pathless is all these, people playing very interesting, different like world instruments.
That's so cool.
Contributing. Yeah, it's very, very cool that he does that. Abzu also has a lot of kind of, obscure instruments mixed in with the orchestra. And if you read his commentary on his YouTube channel on Abzu, yeah, he's very, very deliberate about everything he does. He's deliberate with he wants the two main voices to be this oboe solo, and then this combination of a choir singing with 10 harps. And you can read all sorts of interesting stuff about how he kind of recorded the 10 harps, and that's a whole acoustical problem and whatever. So he's very, very intentional about that. There's like the spirit realm which you go off to that has the harps and the choir. And at the start of the game, when you enter there, it's heavily filtered with all sorts of digital post effects. But as you go on in the game, you get less of that, and it's more natural. Just by the end, it's just the instruments and the voices without any processing. And then there's the kind of oboe and orchestra, which is the voice of the main character, and the undersea world. I could go on, but you really just watch his own video for all the like very, very intentional choices he and the game designers are making about like, this instrument here, does it reflect the psychological state we want you to feel, whatever. So very intentional in a way that film composers really just don't have time to be intentional about. Even if, people do try to do these things, but it's just not enough time. I don't know. I find that really, really interesting, and it's a really effective score. Even if you haven't played the game like I have, you can just listen to it, and like it's so beautiful. And I know he says that's kind of the intent of the game, for it to mostly be about beauty and mystery, and not be about fear and those sorts of emotions, and like challenging. It's not supposed to be a challenging game. You're supposed to just kind of be immersed in like the beauty of nature and like wanting to restore nature. And again, it's so effective. His writing too, his themes tend to be very, very small melodic cells. Normally 2 to 4 notes that he kind of expands on, but it's kind of core of very, very small core. And that's kind of in contrast to a lot of people who are going to write melodically, who tend to write long lines. Like John Williams, it tends to be really long lines. So it's kind of interesting, because I sort of find myself as a composer in between that, where I like shorter things, more like what he tends to do, but in more of a Williams orchestral dressing, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know. It's a really interesting style to kind of take that kind of not minimalist approach, but like more minimalist approach, but also be really melodic with it, and also be so colorful with orchestra and playing around with different post-production effects. Yeah, so overall, it's very, really kind of unique musical voice, a very intentional musical voice about everything he's doing, and I find it really effective. I honestly, as a flute player, I would love to play on one of his video game scores. I'd love to be involved with John Powell, which will probably never happen, and Austin Wintory, which is somewhat more likely because video games are all in Nashville, which is a little bit more of an accessible spot to
maybe my future home city. We'll see.
I don't know. I would love to play on one of his video game scores. They're just so beautiful overall, and really beautiful textures. So I would definitely check out his YouTube channel and his podcast, which is also on there. He also has videos that are just like, basically video essays where he talks about different things. So he's really a great resource as a composer, very active in that sense. Also, like I said, very willing to collaborate with people. Inviting people who have played his own, done their own versions of his own music onto his future scores. And I think he's a musical voice. It's really worth checking out, especially if you are not as familiar with the video game musical world.
Yeah, that's super cool to hear. I hope you get more into gaming more, because I would love to hear more like of the contrasts and like process and flow and stuff like that. I would love to hear more about that, because I don't know. Obviously, Nathan's the person who knows about that kind of stuff, but it's always interesting to hear like the behind the scenes more of this kind of stuff. So
yeah, I know a little bit, but like you really need to know different kinds of technology to be able to like handle loops and things like that. And also just, from what I understand from him too, like a narrative sense of like, well, he talks about certain points where like a player can linger here, but we want to kind of direct them to not spend like 2 hours in this place and move on to the next thing. So how do you like subtly use music to help hint that they should move on? So, that kind of stuff.
I've actually played some bad games where that's done poorly, where I feel like the music is like trying to like a good example is you enter an enemy in, let's say, Borderlands or something like that, enter an area with enemies all around, and all of a sudden you get that like fast-paced sort of action music, but then like you're just passing through. Like in certain games, you don't have to engage with whatever challenge you're presented with. So like it just feels weird when you're like, I already know I'm passing through here, but the game is like, get ready to fight, is the music is what the music is telling you. Or there's some other games where it's a little awkward in different ways too, where it just feels too programmatic. Like I can feel the programming playing the music, if that makes sense, like cueing the music up. Whereas there are some other games that are a lot better at that, where I never feel that way. Like I feel totally immersed, and I guess that's probably a good symbiosis happening with the composer and the game studio, the other team members of the game studio.
Yeah, so, he talked a lot too about like, where he and the game designers want the music to kind of tell the story, and where they don't want it to, when they want other elements to be telling it. And, again, just very intentional, a lot of care into every detail. It's very, very interesting to read, his thought process on that sort of thing.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of games, they'll opt for like very generic sounding stuff a lot of times, where it sounds too maybe it's, I haven't played, many games as of late, so a lot of my references are like, from when I was in high school or something, or playing games then. So I don't know how things have changed or evolved, but like I feel like back then I remember feeling like the music was very cartoony and like, underdeveloped in, how it interacts with the game and stuff. Whereas like a game like The Last of Us has a tremendous score. It's an acoustic guitar based score, but it's one of the best games ever created, in my opinion. The best game I've ever played. I refuse to play the second game because I don't want my world to be destroyed by what people say about that game. But that's a tremendous game. And listening to oh man, I can't remember the composer slash guitarist's name, but him talk about it. It's like, that's how I would like gaming to go in general. A lot more intentional, less like, how do we test this skill in this? I mean, there's, you know, depending on the genre and the game, there's going to be some of that, but it's not like, you know, games need to be a test anymore. You know, it's not like we're in Tetris era, you know, anymore with that. So it's nice to hear that things are still progressing in that direction. It's good to hear. I was going to ask, like, are there people in LA doing that kind of stuff, or?
Well, I think there are people who probably, you know, score these things, but a lot of the recording tends to be in Nashville. And from what I have gathered, a lot of the people tend to live in Nashville too, just because that's more centrally located, also to like where game studios are. I guess Seattle too is also a place where people do that. It's not quite as big in LA. That's my attempt to keep this segment short. So
Cool. Yeah. So thank you guys for watching. Before we go, I've just noticed but before we go, I wanted to shout out a new person on Locals. I know that you're not a supporter, but I just appreciate that you joined the page. So shout out to D_White for joining our Locals page. We've got a few people who are not just us there now, which is awesome. I'm not sure exactly what to post there that should be available to everyone. I might just essentially use it like Instagram and just post, like, you know, the stuff I post Instagram there as well, so that you get, you know, because if you have the app or you have your email connected up, then you'll get a notification for when we post something. So maybe that'll be a nice way for you to understand, oh, hey, we're going live at 7 p.m. today, and here's what we're talking about. Stuff like that for the people who are on there for free. But other than that, if you want to keep the conversation going, link in the description to our Discord. It's a fun place. I've been kind of on and off with how often I post there, but I'm trying to post there more. We talk about all things games, music, and games, music, and film. That's what I do, film, on there throughout the week, and we can continue the conversations that we're having here now. So yeah, we're here every Friday at 7 p.m. See you next week.
I don't wanna cause no problems. I just wanna live my life, but I keep on hearing about nonsense. Me and my dons ain't mobsters, but you know when you see imposters, we know how to read them faces, same way you know how to read them comments. If you wanna talk, let's talk, but around here, make sure you're walking your talk is constant.